Hey, if you've ever wondered, how do I go about getting money to start a business? You've come to the right place. And over the next few minutes, we're going to cover those. As entrepreneurs and business owners, we know that if we have a clear plan, anything becomes possible. And if you can have a clear plan, a clear process to create that plan, and a way to create clarity with your partner or spouse, you can drive to amazing heights. So when it comes to doing a startup, there's a variety of different ways you can get funding. Most people get all excited and hot and bothered about the big venture capital fund or private equity. But the 5 primary ways that most people start their business is 1, it's self-funded. 2, they're actually working with somebody as a contractor initially and they've got contracts. There's actually ways that you can leverage relationships with vendors. Then there's going to be the traditional banking, and then there's those other ones out there, the venture capital, the angel money, different versions of those things. So when it comes to it, the reality is that the biggest question is you have to be 100% prepared when you're going in to ask for money. If you're asking for money, even if you're asking for money from yourself, it's important that you have all your ducks in a row and that you've got it to where it's basically, I like to call it a no-brainer. There's no question that if you do this, then this is going to happen, and your likelihood of success is extremely high. Now, I've consulted with organizations, hundreds and hundreds of organizations around the world, and I've actually done 16 different startups myself, and I know that this is very much possible. And actually in my book, best-selling book, The Aspiring Solopreneur, it actually walks you through step by step on how to do that, and we've got courses at theaspiringsolopreneur.com that can help you with that. But today, let's just go through and talk about it. So and what do I mean by a no-brainer? Well, the reality is for no-brainers, is that it really comes down to how do we know that we've got a good likelihood of success? So this is where the rubric on whether you're going to use money yourself is if your brother-in-law came and said, you know what, I've got this business I want to start, here's what I have all these things lined up, and I'm willing to give you this rate of return for borrowing money from you, would you feel comfortable? And the reality is if you can't get to that level of comfort for your brother-in-law that you have for yourself, then you probably need to rethink what you're doing. Or maybe you just need to clarify and dig down a little bit. But when it comes to the personal financial ways, there's a few different options. 1, there's the traditional way. Do you have savings? Do you have cash? Okay, sometimes we do that. I've started a lot of businesses where I've self-funded it, and usually it works out. But when I'm choosing to be the one who's the investor in that business, I'm very, very critical in making sure that I know where things are. A lot of times I like to see contracts in place already. I want to make sure that the likelihood that I'm going to get repaid is pretty strong. Now, some other areas that you can do is you can do credit cards. And I can tell you that early on, one of the dumbest things I did was I started a coffee house and wine bar with a partner. And the day we opened the door, we had $500 in change in the till, and I had $60,000 on my credit cards, and this was in the 90s. That was a lot of money. And we borrowed every other penny we could from anybody else, from vendors, from anybody we could. And we barely made it. Realistically, we probably shouldn't have because we weren't very smart about it. But I used those credit cards. I would really, really urge caution around this. Unless you're really young and dumb and you're willing to just throw it out there and you can survive a bankruptcy, please avoid that. Now, the next one is around a HELOC. And this is it's a mortgage term for home equity line of credit. But this is where if you happen to have if you own your own home and you have a lot of equity in there, you may be able to go and borrow money on the equity in your house. You go to the bank, say you're using your house as collateral, and you borrow money from the bank for that, and then you can use that to start your business. Again, when you do that, particularly if you're married, you better make sure you got your ducks in a row, and the likelihood is pretty high that you're going to be successful. But again, there's ways that you can do that. In some of our other videos, we discuss those things. Now, let's talk about a couple of alternative ways that sometimes people don't always think about. But particularly if you're a solopreneur or if you're a small business just getting started, a lot of times whoever you're contracting with may actually become a funding source for you. In some cases with larger organizations, they may say, look, it's towards the end of the year, I've got money I need to get rid of, otherwise they're going to get dinged in their budgets. So you say, look, why don't you pay me in advance? I'll give you a 10% discount, and they can actually give you funding up front. Now you have to do the work, and you're agreeing that you're going to do those things, but they can actually become a source of funding for you in a almost a backward type way. Now, sometimes you pay for it, and you pay for it a little bit and give them a discount, but a lot of times the different contracts that you have may be willing to do that. So if, for example, you're a coder and you're working with somebody and you want to contract with them to do some work, they may say, okay, yeah, we'll pay you when you're done. It's like, okay, well, I'd say what? I would prefer I'd get 30% up front, and then you can pay me the rest at the time of conclusion. But there's different ways that you can structure the payments, and that's actually a way that can sometimes fund the different startup aspects. The other thing we didn't talk about that's really important is to remember that realistically, it's so reasonable to start a business anymore. That there are a ton of different ways, and again, with the book, you go through and you can see, how can I get started? Where are the areas I need to go? What's it going to cost me? What do I need to know about insurance and compliance and accounting and things like that? But once you start having those budgets, you'll be amazed at how much do I have, how much do I need, and then where do I get started? And now the other way to do this sometimes is maybe you're staying with your existing job and you start moonlighting for somebody else, and it helps you slowly transition in. Now, I've even seen sometimes where somebody's working at a certain job, they decide to leave and start their own gig, and they go back to the same company and they get twice as much money. You're like, dude, why is that? How on earth can that happen? Well, the reality is as an employee, there's a lot of additional expenses for an employer. Those things come into what we call a fully loaded cost of what does that employee cost. So at a minimum, we have the Social Security match. So there's at least 10-15% there. If they're offering you insurance, there could be another 15 to 20% there. If they're offering 401k, there could be 15 to 20% there. If they do things like travel or office or things like that, once you factor in the fully loaded cost of having an employee, a lot of times it's 150% of what it is for of what their pay is. So meaning if you make $100,000, you actually cost the company up to $150,000. And that's where you can come back and say, hey, I'm willing to do this, because then you can start to absorb those costs, and you have different parameters of what you can do as a solopreneur than what the company can do. So first place is you can do self-funding. Second, sometimes you can, whoever you're working with, you can talk with them in different ways. Third case, sometimes depending on who you're working with and what type of business it is, you can talk to the vendors. So if you're a tattoo parlor and you want to start your own shop, you can see what are the vendors of those different things. You're going to need the chair, you're going to need certain equipment, you're going to need certain build out, things like that. Are they willing to participate with this? I've seen this a lot in restaurants, although I don't recommend restaurants. Restaurants are a giant pain in the ass. But there are leasing companies that will lease you equipment. Usually it's at a higher rate, maybe up to 25%, but you can write all of that off. And it's a way that you don't have to put your own cash or capital into it. So the next one is going to be banks. And I'll be really candid. Most banks won't lend to you if you need the money. Banks only like to lend to you if you don't need the money. And what I mean by that is banks are ultra conservative with it, and rarely do they fund startups. So they may be willing to start up if we go back to having a contract. You say, I'm skilled with this, and this, and I'm really good at it. And I just got an agreement, a 6-month or a year-long contract with this company over here, ABC company, and they're willing to pay me these things. They'll pay me this for delivering it. I need to borrow $10,000 in the interim to get the business up and started. That gives a better story, but you're still going to have to sign personally. And what that means is you got to put your name on the bottom line. It's not just the business. So if for some reason it fails, you owe it, no matter what, and they will haunt you forever if you don't pay it. Now, when you're starting to go and talk with banks, and we talk a lot about this in the book, not all banks are equal. There's a lot of banks that have certain parameters of what they will and won't do for lending. They know that internally, but it's illegal for them to tell you that. So what I mean is that if it's a larger bank, they may only say, we only do loans over $5 million. But if you come in and say, yeah, I need $50,000 to get this business started, they'll say, okay, great, here's your paperwork, here's this, fill all this stuff out. Knowing full well they are never gonna do that loan. But it's illegal for them to say no because they don't want to get pinched for saying that they're being discriminatory. So instead, they'll just waste your time. So a couple of very simple tricks early on when you go talk to a banker. It's your job to be vetting and interviewing the banker. If the banker comes across as, oh yeah, no, I know everything and you work for me and I'll tell you how to handle this, probably not going to work. But if you can go to that banker and be curious and say, hey, you know, Miss Banker, help me understand. How many loans this size did your bank make last year? And if they're like, none, okay, that's something they can tell you. Great, thank you very much. Can you suggest any banks that do specialize more in the smaller loans? Who else, if you were in my shoes, would you be going and talking to? And they're going to be able to help you with those things. But again, it's going to be, what is the collateralization? That collateralization could be a contract. It could be a home equity line of credit with your home. It could be other tools and pieces in there. But banks are usually challenging, and I'll be candid, I've almost never been able to get bank financing on startups unless it's been my own and I can collateralize it with something else. And usually it's cheaper for me to just fund it myself, or if I'm doing investing. Now, let's talk about the last traditional way. And this I'm bunching in a bunch of different things, but this is the romantic stuff that everybody gets excited about. And actually, you know, I'm going to do two. One would be the other would be friends and family. And we sort of touched on that in the self-funded, but the friends and family is where a lot of this starts. And I would urge a lot of caution around borrowing money from friends and family, because it's the kind of thing that can really, man, if it goes south, whew, it is amazing how they will turn into Joe Pesci from Goodfellas and wanting to know where their money is. So if you choose to go out to ask friends and family, I would make sure that you use the same lens that I suggested for yourself. Is how clear are you that you're going to get paid, that you're going to be successful with this? And how can you test it? And there's ways to do it, and we'll talk about those in other videos, but make sure that you're crystal clear, because if you're not, I have seen that destroy more friendships and really more Thanksgivings and Christmases than you would imagine, because people think it's going to go one way, then it doesn't go the other way. Now, on the flip side, if you choose to invest for somebody in friends and family, I'm going to encourage you, it's like, yep, I make the money and that you never are going to see it again. Because if you don't and you have those anticipations, it will bite you in the ass. Now, the last one we were going to talk about, just high level, is the idea of venture capital, the big, it can be angel capital, it can be all the different types of things. It's the private equity stuff. It's the romantic stuff that people hear about and they do videos on. That is really rare, just to be blunt. There are people out there who will do it, but you have to have a POC. You have to have proof of concept of what you're doing. When you're starting right out of the gate, you've got to get some of these others. Almost never will people just fund an idea. Maybe if you've got a massive pedigree and you happen to be in the right place. It happens in Silicon Valley here and there when you've got the MIT and Stanford graduate folks that are getting together and they've got these ideas, and people will bet on the individual. But realistically, it's pretty rare. They need to see that you have some sort of success rolling. And candidly, I invest in a fair number of companies. I won't if somebody starts using A round, tranche, different types of venture capital wording, because 90% of the time, as soon as somebody starts trying to go after venture capital money, they end up just chasing money. They completely forget about actually building and driving the business. And I want people staying focused on building and driving the business. So with this, hopefully you found some value, some nuggets in here. There's a whole bunch of other ones that we're gonna have on this channel. So please, if you like this, subscribe and check out some of the other videos. If you have any comments, don't be afraid to leave them in the comment box below. Thank you, keep smiling.